All right, so you know how you sent us all that fascinating stuff? Well, we're diving right into it.
Yeah, especially Boris Ratnikov's Gustache Zizninaputi. A taste of life on the path.
And seriously, some of these ideas are mind-blowing, like how what we believe about the world connects with these, like, totally unexpected ways of getting information.
Right, and the potential that might be just sitting there inside us waiting to be tapped.
Exactly. What we're talking about here is everything from the very core of our belief systems and how that fits with both science and spirituality.
And then there's the ways we experience the world that go way beyond our usual five senses, right? Plus, the power of our own thoughts.
And how those thoughts can literally shape the reality around us. That's a big one.
Absolutely. And one thing that really jumps out is how the Soviet Union, they were seriously invested in researching what you might call superhuman abilities.
I mean, think about that. What does that kind of commitment tell us about what we humans might really be capable of?
That's the core of what we're exploring, trying to bring all these different pieces together, give you a clearer picture, but in a way that makes sense.
Right, without getting lost in a jumble of information.
Right, gotta have those aha moments.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Worldview.
Mm.
How do we actually form that? Because these sources are saying it's not just about cold, hard logic.
Right, right. It's tied up with art, with morality and ethics, even politics.
And what's really interesting, it says our worldview isn't just some intellectual thing. It goes deeper into a spiritual dimension. And it's practical, too.
It's rooted in our spirit, that inner conviction, more than just pure logic. And that spirituality, it gives us a sense of certainty, of faith.
Like filling in the gaps where our knowledge runs out
Yeah.
so we can still act, even when we're not totally sure.
Exactly. It's like science is all about understanding the universe with a capital U using intellect. But the human perspective brings in our world, our spirit, our personal view of things, our own worldview. Right. It's like the whole vastness of the universe becomes something we experience through a human lens.
It becomes personal.
Exactly. And that difference, that's key. See, science is always going for these objective truths, things you can measure, prove over and over.
But our worldview, that's personal. It's shaped by our experiences, our culture, how we were raised.
But these sources say that's not a bad thing. That personal view is actually how we find meaning and purpose in the universe.
I see what you mean.
And thinking about how you're interested in different ways of knowing, understanding how that worldview gets built, that's a huge starting point.
All right, now for something that sounds straight out of a spy movie. Metacontact.
Oh yeah, here we go.
The sources talk about it like a technology or maybe a method for getting information. Apparently, the Soviet military was super interested in it.
Yeah, and this is where things get really wild.
Right.
The idea that there could be a systematic way, a tech almost, to access information that goes beyond our five senses.
Not sight, sound, touch.
None of that. The text makes it clear, though, this metacontact information isn't absolute truth. It's more like a starting point for thinking and digging deeper.
So you don't just download the answer, but you get clues, hints.
Yeah, exactly. It's what they call probabilistic. It's about possibilities, not certainties. And to get specific results, you need a very precise technique.
That whole concept of knowing in a way that's not through our normal senses,
Yeah.
that's a huge rabbit hole to go down.
No kidding. It really makes you think about what we might be missing. What else is out there?
Okay, so the next thing these sources talk about is the role of spirituality and this idea of cosmic awareness.
Uh-huh.
They say that some of the greatest artists and writers, Homer, Tolstoy, all these heavy hitters, seem to have this almost intuitive sense about life.
Right, right.
A deep understanding of our inner world and where humanity fits into the grand scheme of things.
Like they could see the big picture somehow.
And this ties into something we see throughout history and across cultures, this idea that deep understanding doesn't always come from just logic.
The text even mentions Taoist philosophy, getting knowledge directly from the world through mystical practices, but also living morally.
It's about connecting with the world in a deep way, not just studying it.
Exactly. And it gets even wilder. The sources talk about potentially communicating with hierarchies in the universe.
I mean, that sounds pretty out there.
It does, doesn't it? But it raises a really big question. What is consciousness, really? Are we part of something much bigger than ourselves?
Okay, I'm listening.
Because the sources are saying that consciously engaging with what they call universal reason, that can lead to huge personal transformation.
Not just learning information, but actually changing who you are.
That seems to be a core part of it. And people report some pretty intense benefits, a stronger sense of spirituality, a broader view of global stuff, even a boost to creativity.
That's fascinating.
The text highlights this feeling of being connected to the big cosmos, knowing you're a part of something vast and interconnected.
It's like that deep human need for meaning and purpose, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly. And that leads us to the nature of reality itself, right? What is reality and how does our consciousness shape it?
Okay, here we go.
These sources suggest that the reality we see around us today, it's a direct result of past actions and thoughts, both ours individually and humanity's as a whole.
It's all connected.
Right. And they're saying these actions and thoughts interact with universal laws, which are still mostly a mystery to us.
I mean, there's so much we don't know.
And they go on to ask some pretty big questions. Where did humanity come from and what are we doing here? And they throw out this wild idea. Maybe what we think of as chance is actually just a pattern we haven't figured out yet.
A pattern we don't understand.
Right. It really makes you question how we usually think about cause and effect.
It also mentions that people in high-level security positions tend to believe that nothing is truly random.
That's a bold statement, isn't it?
Like there's an underlying order to things.
Exactly. A deeper level of connection that we're not always tuned into.
So what are they saying then? How does this information actually work?
Well, they say that for certain people, information comes from specific points in what they call the information space. And it's received at frequencies that match their mental vibrations.
Their mental vibrations.
Right. And the higher, more refined those vibrations are, the more accurate the information is supposed to be.
So even people with psychic abilities, maybe they don't fully understand where those insights come from or how it all works.
Yeah, it's like they can tap into it, but the mechanics are still fuzzy. And then the sources circle back to metacontact as the method and the operator as the person receiving this information.
So you're saying information about the past, even the future, could be accessed right now.
That's what they're implying. But they say the problem is a lot of decision makers don't get it, they don't trust it, so they don't use it.
That's interesting.
It is, isn't it?
And that brings us to the limits of what we think of as knowledge, right? And the power of the mind. The sources say that some really deep insights from history or experiments from people like Tesla or John Lilly, we haven't fully grasped them.
And their theory is maybe it's because those people, their mental vibrations were different. They were operating on another level.
So our current science might not be able to fully explain what the human mind can do.
That's what they're suggesting. And they also talk about how spiritual practices like asceticism, a really disciplined life, can lead to similar abilities.
It's like there are different ways to unlock these parts of the mind that go beyond just science.
Right. And it really makes you wonder, what are we missing when we only rely on our five senses to understand the world?
So much, probably.
Right. The text makes this distinction, saying our five senses are for adapting to the physical world, but consciousness, that's for something deeper. It's for understanding our purpose.
Or why?
Yeah, and that leads to a really big philosophical question. Why are humans even here? The text contrasts that with the old debates about whether spirit or matter is more important, you know?
Like it's shifting the focus.
Right, to this core question of purpose.
I like that.
And being an information channel operator, it's not just about having some talent. It takes training, inner discipline. The text says the level of an operator, how reliable they are, it depends on how well they translate the information they receive.
So it's a skill, not just a gift.
Exactly. It's about their whole psychophysical condition, their mental and physical health, and their internal culture, too.
Internal culture?
Yeah, like their knowledge base, their worldview, their ability to understand clearly without bias.
Interesting.
And then they make this distinction between asking, what is higher reason? That's a scientific question. But asking who is higher reason, that's more spiritual, ethical.
Right, I see the difference.
And they describe this subtle plane, which is like a holographic level of planetary information made up of energy and thought images. It's hard to even imagine.
It is. Okay, so let's get into these ideas of vibrations, thoughts, and how they might be shaping reality.
Okay, let's do it.
And the sources make this distinction between oscillations and vibrations. What's the difference?
Well, oscillations are broader, like local changes in energy over time. Vibrations are specifically the oscillations of solid bodies, things actually moving back and forth.
So like a subtle energy shift versus something
Yeah.
physically shaking.
Exactly. And when we try to compare these metaphysical ideas with our normal scientific measurements, it doesn't quite work.
It's hard to translate.
Right, like trying to link the vibration of the planet in yoctohertz to the frequency of a thought in yottahertz, it just shows the limits of our current understanding.
Right. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
And the main point is, any information flow, no matter what it is, the goal is truth. But the depth of that truth, how easy it is to access, that can be very different.
So true.
They call it psi information transfer. It's a one-time, focused event, and it depends on the operator being prepared and able to handle interference.
Like blocking out distractions.
Exactly. And the sources really emphasize that thoughts are not just some abstract things in our heads. They're concrete, real.
That's a big statement. Thoughts are real.
Right. They're saying the tendency to create thoughts is part of all of nature, not just humans. They even say natural disasters might be expressions of these powerful mental disturbances.
Wow.
And they say every human action has a thought component, like an energy wave, but the intensity varies.
So every action starts with a thought.
Right. But even when we think something logically, the energy behind it might not be logical or helpful.
Interesting. So we have to be aware of what's behind our thoughts.
Exactly. And they separate the informativeness of information. Did it get through accurately?
From its content richness. How deep and detailed is it?
It's like just because you got a message doesn't mean you understand it fully.
Right. They use this analogy of water flowing over obstacles to explain the challenges of transferring information.
And how it can be distorted.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about these information channels in cosmic time. The sources use the analogy of a telephone network, which is pretty easy to grasp.
Yeah, it is. But what's interesting is they say these psi-level channels, like metacontact, they can transmit way more than just words. It's not just a phone call.
Right, and they define the speed of a channel as how much information it can carry in a unit of what they call absolute metacosmic time.
Absolute metacosmic time. That sounds complex.
It is a bit out there. They describe it as being measured in minutes and seconds of absolute attainability.
Okay.
And they talk about this concept of Zakvaska, which is like when this absolute time slows down like a bottleneck.
Zakvaska. Got it.
And the ideal scenario, they call it the absolute cosmic flow, where information flows without any loss. But they also say these absolute values aren't things we can actually measure as humans.
Right. We're limited by our human perspective.
Exactly.
The sources then talk about how getting knowledge through information is better than through physical experiment.
Right. They're bringing in the ethics of it. Why cause harm to anything when you might be able to learn in a less invasive way?
It's a good point.
And they criticize how human-centered we are when we try to create AI. We're limited by our own viewpoint, our biases.
It can't be truly objective.
Right. They say real impartiality might only be possible if we could understand the absolute, which is beyond us right now.
That makes sense.
And there's this warning about progress without a deeper understanding. They say that the decline of human society could lead to disaster if we're not more careful with the information we use and the technologies we create.
Like we could destroy ourselves.
Yeah, it's a pretty dire warning. They use destructive technology as an example, but they also offer some hope, saying that reaching the level of universal reason, which is different from just higher reason, might be possible.
How do we reach it?
They say it takes dedication and really thinking about how we use the information we get.
So it's not just about acquiring knowledge, but about how we use it.
Exactly. And then they talk about these huge scales, interplanetary and even intergalactic communication.
Wow, we're going cosmic here.
I know. They mention high-level contact for information exchange between planets. But when it comes to galaxies or even different universes, it's not like a back-and-forth conversation.
How does it work then?
It goes through what they call the higher hierarchy, with strict authorization to keep things balanced on such a massive scale.
It's like there's a hierarchy to the information flow to prevent chaos.
Right, that seems to be the idea.
Now, what about minimizing information loss? Because it seems like with these unconventional methods, a lot could get lost or misunderstood.
Definitely. The text says every event has an information component, and we lose a lot of it if we don't use it or understand it.
So how do we minimize that loss?
They say it's about reducing how much the environment absorbs the information, being more mindful of where our attention goes. When we transmit information, it can lose its meaning if the wrong people pick it up.
That's interesting.
And predicting exactly how much information will be lost is tough, but they say theft of information, both intentional and accidental, happens a lot.
It makes sense. We've all had those conversations where we feel like we weren't quite understood or we missed something important.
Exactly.
And what about the speed of light barrier? That's a big one in science fiction, exceeding the speed of light.
Right. The sources address that, saying going faster than light doesn't necessarily mean entering another dimension, like we often imagine.
So what does it mean?
It represents a limit in our current understanding. They imply that what's beyond that speed is a new human state, one that has transcended our normal ways of understanding reality.
That's a mind-bending concept.
No kidding.
All right, let's talk about the training of these information channel operators. It sounds pretty intense.
It's a hierarchical system, and your progress depends on your own effort. To introduce a student to the channel, the mentor makes a request, and the student's qualities are evaluated.
So not everyone makes it.
No, you could be accepted immediately, rejected, or given a trial period to see if you're a good fit.
It's like a serious apprenticeship.
Right. And for those who do progress to new levels, they get access to more knowledge, guidance from higher level entities, and tougher assignments to test their stability.
It's like they level up in a video game.
Kind of, yeah. And they say having a chronic illness doesn't automatically disqualify someone. What matters more are your frequency characteristics, like your carrier frequency and modulation.
So it's more about your energetic makeup than your physical health.
That's what they're saying.
And what about the average person? Do we all have some ability to receive this psi information, even if we haven't had this training?
They say everyone does, even if we're not aware of it. They describe the subconscious mind as this powerful processing system, not entirely dependent on the physical brain.
The subconscious is so powerful.
Right. But they also say there's negative or inaccurate information out there in the databases of the universe.
So not all information is good information.
Right. And operators have the right to process even unrighteous information if it's part of their destiny, according to the text.
But they also warn against looking for forbidden knowledge, like trying to find out other people's fates or the future of relationships.
Yeah, that's a big no-no. They say it can have serious consequences, even physical harm.
So there are limits to what we're supposed to know.
Exactly. Accurate information itself isn't harmful, but operators who insist on getting answers they're not meant to have, they take a big risk.
That's a good point.
And then they talk about this inner light and Noocosmology.
Noocosmology, what's that?
It's basically the study of Earth from a cosmic perspective, like looking down on it from the stars.
Yeah,
They say it can change your whole consciousness, how you see reality.
I can imagine.
And they compare people who are turned into these spiritual levels with historical holy figures who created these high-frequency energy fields.
Like they were radiating positive energy.
Yeah.
It's-
So it's not just about receiving information, but becoming a source of it, of positive influence.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But there are also warnings about threats for people who work with this unconventional information
Right. It can change their whole worldview, their relationships, everything.
because they're exposed to so much more.
Exactly. And they say some people who get these abilities might get them from what they call dark forces, which could be dangerous.
Like it's not always coming from a good place.
Right. And then there are the effects on the operators themselves, both physically and socially. They say being an operator trains your hormonal system, boosting your immunity and psychophysical abilities.
So you get healthier and your mind-body connection gets stronger.
Exactly. And these effects are permanent, they become tools. But socially, developing these abilities can be tough
Why is that?
because you're able to influence things around you more, which can create tension with people who don't understand what you're going through.
Like they might think you're weird.
Right. So operators have to find a new balance in their relationships.
That makes sense. It's like you're playing on a different level.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing to me that there's so much interest globally
Well,
in these extraordinary abilities. The sources mention the U.S. and China specifically.
yeah, they say a lot of countries are trying to figure out how to identify and train people with phenomenal abilities for things like remote influence and gathering information intuitively.
It's like real-life superpowers.
I know, right? And they say trained special operators can be incredibly accurate, like 90%, on things like personal characteristics, hidden connections, even future potential.
90%. That's huge.
Right. And they're using these abilities in government, intelligence, industry, all kinds of places for personnel selection, threat detection, diagnostics.
So valuable.
Definitely. And they say Russia is leading the way in developing these methods, which are hard to copy because they're so tied to the individual who created them.
It's like They're uniquely Russian.
Yeah. And the specialists they train in these schools, they do things like gather information, predict events, locate people and objects, retrieve data from the subconscious mind, psychological profiling, health diagnostics, risk assessment. The list goes on.
It's incredible what they can do.
It really is.
But the sources also make this crucial point about conscious development versus manipulation. They say a person's true value is in their own conscious growth.
Right, and they're critical of controlling people by stopping their personal development and pushing them down certain paths.
It's like limiting their potential.
Exactly. And they say our focus on physical needs instead of spiritual and moral development is keeping people at the level of reasonable animals, making them easier to manipulate.
It's like we're not living up to our full potential as humans.
Right. And they quote this priest
Oh, man.
talking about spiritual decline and the need for universal principles.
What does he say?
He says it's like we're betraying something higher through hypocrisy, not living up to our ideals.
So it's not enough to just talk the talk. We have to walk the walk.
Exactly. And the text says we need to live by universal canons, those basic principles of truth and harmony, not just human-made rules.
Right. There's a higher law.
And if we deviate from these canons, it leads to a kind of natural selection where things that are out of alignment self-destruct.
It's like the universe corrects itself.
Yeah. And they say Russia could unite its people by promoting images of intelligence, strength, independence.
Powerful images.
Right, because they say images govern people, and real motivation comes from either self-interest or a deep understanding of what's needed.
So we have to choose what kind of images we're putting out there.
Exactly. And there's concern about Russia's image being devalued, its cultural heritage being suppressed. They want a revival based on spirituality, a strong military, citizen unity, and new cultural figures.
A new era for Russia.
Yeah. And they say political parties need to base their programs on real self-knowledge and understanding of the world.
So it's not just about slogans, it's about depth.
Right. And to achieve justice in society, they say we need to awaken social energy by spreading knowledge.
Knowledge is power.
They say the unequal distribution of resources is holding back the whole nation because people focus on personal gain instead of a bigger vision.
We need to share the wealth, so to speak.
Yeah, so everyone can reach their potential.
And they say the challenges we face in life, the tough times, they actually serve a purpose.
Right. Those difficult situations might be necessary for growth, for gaining experience. They even say our soul might have desires or intentions from before we were born that influence what happens to us.
So it's like we choose our challenges on some level.
That's the idea. And they say each person has their own path to walk, with choices to make along the way.
It's free will.
Right. And they're urging us to recognize our value in serving the planet and others, because if we don't, we risk becoming worthless people and getting weeded out by natural selection.
It's like we have a responsibility to contribute.
Exactly. And they say that even though all knowledge is theoretically available, understanding comes gradually as we walk our own path of learning.
It's a journey.
And they also point out that we often limit ourselves way more than we realize. Our beliefs, our convictions, our fears, all of that holds us back.
It's like we're our own worst enemy.
Sometimes, yeah.
They describe the world as both random chance and precise patterns, where every event means something.
Right, and they really emphasize looking at things from multiple perspectives, even opposite ones, to get rid of conflict and understand each other better.
That's good advice.
And they criticize the whole tug-of-war mentality, saying it creates constant struggle instead of cooperation. They say that for the planet to transition harmoniously, we need a majority of people moving towards common goals, each person understanding their role in it.
Working together, not against each other.
Right. And if we resist our intended path in life, they say there might be consequences, like a push to get us back on track.
Like the universe is nudging us in the right direction.
Yeah. And if we keep resisting, it can even show up as physical imbalances or chronic diseases.
That's scary.
It is. And they say true healing involves talking to your own soul and going back to your pre-birth contract, the path you agreed to before you were born.
So we have to listen to our soul.
Exactly. And they say if everyone was more thoughtful and perceptive, humanity would be more intuitive and wise.
We'd make better decisions.
Right. And they criticize institutions that teach conformity instead of freedom and critical thinking.
Like they're holding us back.
Yeah. And acting for the common good, they say, that's the key to a smooth transition to the next level for society. Those difficult situations we face, they might seem unfair, but they're necessary and we'll understand them better after death.
It's all part of the plan.
Right. And we choose, or at least attract, all of our experiences to guide us on our path. We have to accept them and process them to avoid repeating the same mistakes.
So it's about learning from our experiences.
Exactly.
They describe thoughts as energy with frequency characteristics, and when we share similar thoughts, they form egregores. What exactly are those?
Think of it this way. Our thoughts have their own energy signature, like a frequency. And when a group of people share similar thoughts and intentions, those energies combine and resonate, creating an egregore.
It's like a collective thought form.
Right. They're these super conscious entities made of psychic energy and information. And they can be positive or negative, depending on the thoughts and emotions fueling them.
So our thoughts really do have power.
Absolutely. And they say to achieve inner harmony and well-being, we need a clear life purpose.
A reason to get out of bed in the morning.
Exactly. It gives us focus and energy, and it's best if our goals are spiritual and moral because those attract positive forces.
So aim high, but for the right reasons.
Right. And set long-term goals, breaking them down into smaller steps. They talk about interest, a conscious need, as the driving force behind our actions.
Like we have to actually want it.
Right. And they say the psyche itself regulates our life energy and inner harmony, what we experience as our mood.
So it's all connected. Our thoughts, our energy, our mood.
Yeah. And our worldview develops as we integrate our perceptions, values, and how we deal with life.
It's how we see the world and our place in it.
Exactly. And they say that if enough people share a similar worldview, it can actually start to shape reality for everyone.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And they identify attention as the key to managing our psychic energy.
Like what we focus on matters.
Right. We have to learn to control what we focus on and how we redirect our attention, like in the example of looking at someone's face when they're being aggressive.
To diffuse the situation.
Exactly. And they say what we take in from the outside world, whether it's positive or negative, directly affects our mind and body.
So we have to be mindful of what we're exposing ourselves to.
Right. It triggers responses in our organs and impacts our emotional balance.
So it's all interconnected.
Totally. And they're critical of the idea that material wealth equals happiness.
Like money can't buy you love or happiness.
Exactly. They say we should focus on building strong families. Comparing it to building a home needs a good external presentation and a solid foundation of love.
A strong foundation is so important.
Right. And they say the modern idea of absolute equality between genders has led to a decline in traditional feminine and masculine principles.
That's an interesting perspective.
It is, isn't it? And they say the focus should be on loving the person, not just how they make you feel about yourself.
It's about genuine love, not ego.
Right. And living morally is really important. They say if you keep experiencing misfortune, it's a sign to make a big change.
Like a wake-up call.
Exactly. Nature uses those tough times to make us reflect and adjust our course.
It's like a cosmic course correction.
Right. And they talk about how society views men and women based on different factors.
Like what?
Well, for women, it's their role as mothers, their sexuality, their attractiveness, their interaction with the environment, and a supposed openness to the extraordinary.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is. And for both genders, societal views are shaped by things like social standing, money,